Awesome. So, hey everyone, I'm SJ with Commission Shift. I'm joined here with a few guest panelists today, and I'll introduce them soon. But we are debriefing on today's open meeting at the Railroad Commission. This is the monthly open meeting that the Railroad Commission holds in Austin, and they go through hundreds of agenda items to talk about oil and gas issues and make decisions. And they do it very quickly. Today, I think it was at least 300 agenda items, and it went by in about 30 minutes. So, with here at Commission Shift, we work on slowing down what happens and explaining some of these agenda items, the significance of them, and what it has to do with the rest of us here in Texas, how these decisions affect us. So, today we're honing in on two specific agenda items, items 2 and 3 were two saltwater disposal well permits, and they were approved unanimously by the Railroad Commission. Staff recommended approval of these permits. Railroad commissioners agreed and approved them. And these saltwater disposal well permits could impair a very important aquifer, the Glen Rose slash Maverick Basin aquifer, which the cities of Laredo and Eagle Pass are planning to use in the future. So we want to talk about these permits, saltwater injection, the science behind it, and how these communities would be impacted. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce some of our speakers today. Um, Martin Castro is Watershed Science Director of the Rio Grande International Study Center in Laredo. And I'm also joined by Jessie Fuentes, advocate with Southwest Water Coalition and Eagle Pass Border Coalition. Julie Range is Commission Ship's policy manager, and she is going to speak to us as well about the science behind produced water injection and the risks. And if Dr. Ron Green is able to join us, he may be able to get on this call later. And he's a retired hydrologist, expert witness for Wintergarden Groundwater Conservation District, which challenged those permits and is based in San Antonio. So I'm going to kick things off. And thank you, first of all, for joining us on this mini panel where we kind of dive into these agenda items and this issue. And so thank you so much for being here. And so, Martin, I'm going to ask you first. Um, Maybe you could set the table for us and talk about saltwater injection or produced water. What is that? What is that exactly? And can you speak to the city of Laredo's water needs and how that affects or how you think it could be affected by more produced water injection?
Yeah, thank you, SJ, and hi everyone. Yeah, thank you for having me on an organization on this call today. I really appreciate the consideration and to be here with you all today and share sort of our points of view. Just really quickly, SJ, I think before I go into the topic of produced water, I'd like to just briefly just tell a little bit about our organization and what we do, and then I'll get right into your questions. As SJ mentioned, I'm Martin Castro, I'm the Watershed Science Director here at the Rio Grande International Study Center. We say RISC for short. We are a 32-year-old environmental frontline advocacy organization based here in South Texas, and our mission is to preserve and protect the Rio Grande for our present and future generations. A lot of our work is focused around in and around the Rio Grande Basin, at least here in South Texas. Primarily serve in a more technical scientific role here at the organization, managing several water conservation restoration projects. But I have some experience working in and around the oil and gas industry. I previously worked for the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, where I was a natural resource specialist and managed the water rights program for the Rio Grande Basin here in Texas. And I spent a lot of time in the Eagle Ford Shale, especially here in Webb County, where it's a very large natural gas producing region. So I have some experience in that sort of realm. So your first question, SJ, I might have to ask you to repeat the second part of your question. But produced water, without going to sort of technical language and more plain language, is essentially water that's naturally present in underground sort of geologic formations, but it includes fluids that are injected from oil and gas operations during drilling, stimulation, excuse me, such as fracking, for example. This can then flow back up with oil and gas, hydrocarbons that are extracted from the formations. It's essentially just it's wastewater that's generated during oil and gas production. So again, oil and gas reserves are extracted, hydrocarbons are extracted. This drives fluids upwards into production wells, and then the water is then mixed with hydrocarbons as it emerges from the well. But produced water is typically, I think, I'm not the expert on it, but I do know a little bit that its composition depends on the geology, but it includes usually very highly saline and brine, like very high total dissolved solid composition, dissolved salts. Sometimes there's a lot of presence of heavy metals, hydrocarbons, of course, and then sometimes there can be, depending on the formation, there can be naturally occurring radioactive materials. Most of the time, produced water includes chemicals that are injected by the industry especially when they are fracking these formations. These chemicals are usually sometimes not disclosed fully because they are considered proprietary and or trade secrets. So the chemical composition can sometimes be unknown. But the key point about produced water is that it is often far saltier than seawater, many times saltier. So that is usually the case. Why it's a concern, especially in our region here, in our neck of the woods in South Texas, produced water is a sort of a hazardous waste stream because it can contaminate groundwater supplies if exposed to soils or crops that are sensitive. It can certainly damage those types of crops and ecosystems, including aquatic ecosystems as well. And because of the saline nature of produced water, it can certainly pose, excuse me, corrosion risks to infrastructure such as piping or other infrastructure that's not built to withstand sort of the high saline properties of produced water. Historically, I think, and I know SJ, Robert, Commissioner Shift is a way more has way more expertise on this than I do, but certainly I think historically the most common disposal method of produced water is that it gets injected into class two injection wells at saltwater disposal sites. I think that's probably the most cheapest and widely used method. But there are some emerging alternatives for produced water, which I think is sort of the topic of today's sort of conversation, SJ. And I'm going to ask you to repeat the second part of your first question.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's great. The second part I had was a bit more about how Laredo might be affected by
Right.
the specific permits that were approved today. I know that currently the Rio Grande is the main primary source of drinking water in Laredo. So, what about this aquifer that could be compromised? Are you worried about?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not going to go into the hydrology because Dr. Green is the expert hydrologist on the technical risks. But I think from a watershed and planning perspective, I mean, the risks of produced water, they're interconnected, right? Because you're tying together disposal wells, old legacy wells, and then you have sort of migration pathways and the integrity of some aquifers in this area. I think groundwater contamination um, uh, it does not respect jurisdictional boundaries. And that's important to know because when you live and work in a water scarce region like South Texas, where, as you mentioned, SJ, the river is our only source of drinking water, not just for Laredo, but for our sister city from Nuevo Laredo and 2 million people from Del Rio to the Gulf. There is a high chance that produced water, these permits that are being issued now, they can meet all the technical requirements, but there is certainly a risk or a threat to primary and then secondary water sources for communities like Laredo. We're talking communities that are very solely dependent on surface water supplies. So if there's ever some worst case scenario, of course, and there's some contamination or spill into a surface water body where it's used as a primary source, like the river. I mean, that can pose serious sort of hazardous risks for infrastructure and for public health as well. But yeah, but again, I think that's and as Laredo grows and continues to grow and continues to evolve and hopefully acquire a secondary water source in the future, I think the we should definitely be paying attention to where these permits are being issued, Are there any surface water bodies or groundwater reserve resources that are going to be threatened by the disposal of produced water, whether it's injected underground or disposed of in surface water, creeks or streams? I mean, that's definitely an issue that, as an organization, we want to be keeping a very close eye on.
Thanks. And so, Jesse, I'm going to pivot to you and ask a similar question from Eagle Pass, the perspective there. How does the decision to grant these permits relate to the need to protect groundwater resources in Eagle Pass?
Sure. First of all, thank you. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to be here with you. Such a great panel. Uh, my name, of course, is Jessie Fuentes. I'm here on behalf of the Southwest Water Coalition and the Eagle Pass Border Coalition. And what I'm going to try to explain is our deep concern, because we know that, water has become a commodity. And it's hard for us as individuals to see what's happening and not be concerned. The fact of the matter that these proposed injection wells were approved will affect the southern aspect of the aquifer, where Maverick County, Eagle Pass, Texas is looking to, use as a secondary water source. Our only water source right now is the Rio Grande River. And as part of, I'm going to answer this in two parts. First of all, let's go with the Southwest Water Coalition. It is a brand new organization that, due to the concern of I guess, the conservation and proper administration of both surface water and groundwater, it was just put together, and it's an organization that's concerned about what's happening in Val Verde County, Kinney County, and Maverick County, as far as what all these corporations are coming in and buying properties and drilling, and they're afraid that it will affect their water flow, because they're in a serious situation too. Val Verde Del Rio usually gets their main water from the San Felipe Springs, which on a daily average would pump 8 million gallons. Because of the severity of the crisis with water, or the lack of water, and because unmonitored type of drilling and pulling, it has gone down to about 2 million gallons per day. So they're drilling these wells. There's a lot of situations where, through Val Verde County and Kinney County, people are concerned. And same situation in Eagle Pass. It's historic. The Rio Grande has always flowed, but over the last couple of years, we've had this incident where, we've become concerned about the flow and the level. We know that 80% of the watershed into the Rio Grande comes from Mexico. There's 6 rivers that feed it from Mexico, and there's only 2 that feed it from the state of Texas, which is the Devils and the Pecos, which goes back to also being concerned about, where is this produced water going to be, delivered to, through these injection wells. And also that there's a study that they might, through the Permian Basin, be able to deliver produced water into the Pecos watershed, which eventually, so there's a lot of concern there from residents, from naturalists, from environmentalists, from people like myself, that tries to bring attention to the positive environment that the Rio Grande and its tributaries, not just for the American side, but for the Mexico side, must be observed. So in particular, in Eagle Pass, Texas, one of my biggest concerns is that sometimes we want to implement policies that are not very carefully addressed or thought out as far as consequences. We know that water is a finite resource, where, if no matter who's drilling, you're all drilling from the same source, or no matter what you're injecting into the ground, it's still connected. So in Eagle Pass, we've had a severe emphasis on militarization, and what's happened is, these buoys that were installed there in July of 2023, we had it over those last 2 years. I've had an opportunity to flow by them, study them, visit them, and see what's happening. And the biggest concern as an aspect for water, whether it be surface or underground, is that those buoys collect sediment and they collect debris, and they're creating two separate channels. And the concern of residents is that we're being cut off from the main watershed that comes in from Mexico. And now there's a proposal to establish this militarization of the river 500 miles all the way down from Del Rio to the Gulf. And it's something that's concerning. It's something that I have seen personally firsthand, where the channel is split, the river is split because of the sediment, and it takes constant dredging, it takes constant movement, it takes constant going in there and re-navigating. This is bulldozers in the river, there's all types of dredgers in the river, and I'm going, it would require constant maintenance. It would require constant observation to make sure that the intake valves of all the communities that get their water from the river would be protected. And that is one of the biggest concerns that as a member of these two organizations, as a member of the border, I guess the borderlands, we are concerned about that, because sometimes a full environmental impact study can make a difference. And you can see what's been in the river for the last 2 years. You can see that they've created islands, they've created separation, they've created a separate habitat. And I'm just, in that sense, that's where our emphasis on maybe the consequences of over militarization are not well thought out, which once again comes back to where Maverick County is situated. If you look at where we sit as far as aquifers, the Trinity Edwards to the north and the Carrizo Wilcox to the south, they only touch the northern aspect of Maverick County and the southern aspect of Maverick County also. But we've had instances where, in El Indio, Texas, there's been earthquakes because of all the injection and everything. And now, there's a concern there that this further, acceptance or approval of these incoming wells will be a detriment to the water that's located in those particular aspects of our aquifer connection.
Thank you for explaining that. I think what people maybe don't realize is that it's not just drought that's changing and threatening water, but what you're describing, the over-militarization, the border wall, the infrastructure that has been coming with that is affecting your main water supply. So
absolutely.
The surface water is at risk right now in Texas, and now the groundwater is at risk as well. So where do we turn?
Exactly.
So I want to pull in Dr. Green, who's able to join us. And Dr. Green is a retired hydrologist and expert witness for Wintergarden Groundwater Conservation District. And Wintergarden was the, was opposing the applications for permits by this disposal well. So Dr. Green, I would like to ask you first, for our listeners who may not know, what a groundwater conservation district is, and why was your district, Groundwater Conservation District, opposing these disposal well permits?
Well, first off, my name's Ron.
Okay. Not Dr. Green.
Ron.
Got it.
Okay. So the state of Texas has developed or established usually county-wide entities. They are elected with a staff to manage their groundwater resources. In the case of Wintergarden, it's 3 counties, Zavala, Dimmitt, and LaSalle. And just the way the Railroad Commission operates, they protest every single application that comes into their county. And the way Texas operates and the Railroad Commission, applicants are not required to notify the districts whenever they put in an application. And that they're typically saltwater disposal wells, but they could be evaporation pits, they could be other things. So they have 2 weeks in order to respond to the Railroad Commission and have a seat at the table. So they send in just a standard protest letter for every application that they see. The applicant's required to public notify whenever they submit they need to public notify their intent to put in a saltwater disposal well. That may not be at the time that they put in their permit. So there's very little information that the district or other possible protestants can decide whether to protest at the time of the public notification. So the district reads their paper. Each county has sort of a designated newspaper. They have to go through that every week and file a protest when a permit is intended. The district will then sit on it until some action occurs. And typically that happens when the Railroad Commission looks at the permit and, if acceptable, will deem it administratively complete. And at that point, the applicant has 30 days to tell the Railroad Commission they want a hearing if there's a protest. If there's no protest, then it's approved. And so at that point, the district will ask me as their technical hydrologist, technical consultant as a hydrologist, to review that permit. And so I will go through it and look at it for a number of things, and we can talk about that. And I'll give the important elements of these permits. Just one other sort of side note here. Sometimes the applicants will want to address this earlier than later. So they will ask the district to start doing their technical evaluation, and I will initiate that when the district asks me to. So a number of times when these permits get submitted, no action is taken. When they're public notified, no permit is ever submitted, so it gets dropped and nothing happens. So that's why the district only asked me to step in and start charging time to look at these permits. So in the case of these 2 permits by NGL, NGL had been operating these 2 wells, injection wells, for quite some time. I forget when they originally went in. I was trying to look at notes before we got on, and I didn't get that far. But they were injecting into the Glen Rose formation. And at that time, the Glen Rose formation was not recognized as a freshwater body source. And previously, at least 10, 12 years ago, Wintergarden had opposed a NGL well a little bit further to the west, down there, Asherton, I believe, which is the other side of Creasel Springs. And we were aware of the Glen Rose, the railroad, as being a freshwater body. We didn't know how far to the east it extended. The applicant, NGL, argued successfully that the Glen Rose over in that part was not freshwater. It was saline, so it wasn't afforded the protections given by the state. At that time, I was not aware that NGL had these other 2 injection wells that were injecting into the Glen Rose. So I don't know, 6-8 years ago anyway, the Railroad Commission and the Texas Water Development Board together recognize the Glen Rose as a source of groundwater. And it's deep, it's 5,000-6,000 feet deep. Water comes up, it's hot, but it's good water. And there aren't many wells in it because it's so deep. It'd be $1 million to put a well in. So if they happen to have a old oil well that they've converted to a water well, then they do have water at this place. So about 4 or 5 years ago, NGL on their own, this is several years after the Glen Rose was recognized and declared a groundwater resource, stopped injecting into these two wells into the Glen Rose. They did that on their own. And then, they, like everyone else, in fracking, they have a lot of produced water to dispose. So just one side note, with fracking, where you're going into tight sands and shales, you get a lot of produced water out. I don't know what it's on the Eagle Ford, or in the Permian, it's 3 or 4 gallons of produced water for every gallon of gas, but you're not creating depleted reservoirs. You're taking this produced water and oil and gas out of these tight formations, and there's no place to put the produced water back in. So you have to go to a different reservoir.
Yeah.
So what they want to do down with these two NGL wells, they want to go and inject it above the Maverick Basin aquifer, which is the Glen Rose, and that just doesn't happen. Rarely, I'm not familiar with any other situation where they're injecting produced water above an identified groundwater resource.
Wow.
And what they said, they're always trying to save money, and you can't fault them for that. But they want to use these two existing injection wells, but they want to plug the wells below the base of the injection horizon to protect the Glen Rose aquifer. So the base of the injection horizon was about 3,600 feet, and the top of the Maverick was about 7,300 feet. So there's 3,000 feet or so of intervening geologic formations that supposedly would protect the Glen Rose. The problem is you have these old wells, you don't know what condition they're in. They offered to put in 4 or 5 plugs, I don't recall, with 20 feet or so of cement on top of each one. And my argument was that, if this, plugged borehole fails for whatever reason, you're going to be injecting produced water into a freshwater body indefinitely, because there's no way to know you're doing that. And if you go put in monitoring wells, which they did not offer, and it would not be reasonable, you would just be putting another avenue for potential contamination of that groundwater resource by that monitoring well. So that wasn't a viable solution. So my argument was that, this is not there is a risk involved with these 4 plugs. What happens if you get a batch of plugs that are defective? So it's not like you have a 1% chance of failure, and then a 1% of a 1% is, a thousandth of a percent. And if you do 4, then you're at 10 to the minus 6 or whatever, a highly unlikely risk. And when you're looking at risk, that would probably be acceptable. But the problem is, if you have a bad batch of plugs, just for example, it may be each one's at 10%, but it's not compounded, because if one fails, it's likely that all fail. And so that was my argument. They accepted some of my argument. They didn't like my statistics. And I brought in, the whole issue of the Challenger failure. And the Challenger failure, if you recall, that was the first shuttle that failed, and it was a O-ring that failed on the rocket. Well, the weak link of a plug is elastomer seal, which is an O-ring. So, I had the assessment of this by Richard Feynman. I was waxing eloquent, and prior to that failure, when they asked all the engineers, what's the chance of failure? They said 1 in 100,000. Feynman went back and looked at it, and he said it's about 1 in 100 to 1 in 200. And so when the shuttle program was discontinued, there were 2 failures in 135 shuttle flights. So my argument was that this is a real risk. This is a resource that's targeted by Eagle Pass and others, because water is precious down in this area. There are no other resources. Martine mentioned that, Laredo's looking for a secondary water source. They have been for decades, and they put up, I think, a $500 million bounty if you can come up with one. And no one does, because there is no secondary water source of that's meaningful. And even the Glen Rose aquifer that's deep is, that is such a costly resource. To put wells at 6,000 feet is very expensive, but a municipality could do it. So that was my argument. As you know, it went to the staff. Staff recommended in their proposal for decision to approve it, with the stipulation that instead of 20 feet of cement on top, they put 40 feet. So we got a little bit more protection, but who knows what's going to happen. And this is I forget what the injection rate is, but if they're forcing this much produced water down, it's going to be eroding right on the top of the cement. It's going to go straight down, even though it's a few thousand feet. That's the path of least resistance. So it's going to erode out the cement. Then one, thing fails, and another fails, and you've got this tremendous head of pressure of this produced water that's there for, if something fails. So, I wasn't surprised that the Railroad Commission came to this decision and the commission approved it. I was disappointed because we do on occasion get a favorable ruling from staff and the commission. But, I'm preaching to the choir. That's not a level playing field, but you don't give up. You just keep making it yourself a pain to these people, because if you do protest and you hold them to a higher standard and you don't take frivolous complaints and protests to the Railroad Commission, you're going to slowly move the needle, hopefully to protect these resources. So that's a quick summation. I don't know if I've missed anything or if I rambled on too long.
That was so enlightening to understand just exactly the risks of a plug failure.
Yeah.
And that's the point that you were paying attention to in your argument.
Yeah.
I think that was really eye-opening. And it is a weird math, I think, that you're describing, that like we're trying to quantify this.
Yeah.
Can you really put a price though on drinkable water in
Yeah.
Texas as the years go on? So that was really helpful. And we don't have a lot of time, but I want to pass it to Julie to kind of take us home here. You gave public input at today's meeting and also focused your comments on injection wells and the risks. Do you want to pull out maybe some of the highlights from your comments? You referenced a news story in it about this issue. So can you maybe tie this together and help us kind of see the big picture here?
Yeah, so there was a story published in Rolling Stone recently about the underground injection wells, and it looked backwards and realized that this, like, why are we doing this? What made us think this is an okay process? And really, we discovered that the science wasn't. There's been a lot of concern since the beginning, and back in 1971 at a symposium in Houston, there are some speakers that expressed some of these concerns, and really, they even suggested that the practice of disposal should be temporary until they come up with a better solution. And some of the one of the quotes, basically at the symposium, Robert Stallman, a USGS hydrologist, was concerned that injecting this liquid waste would result in pollution of groundwater, of surface water, changes to the permeability of rocks, cave-ins, earthquakes, and contamination of underground oil and gas deposits. And these are all things we are seeing today. And so that's, their predictions are coming true. And we've created this, like, what we're seeing today is these pollution-filled plumes that we injected, that you're starting to see these showing up at ever-increasing distances from injection sites. So while I guess we focused a lot today on a specific well and the risks around the plug failing. Uh, what happens when these plugs fail? Like there's tons and tons of wells, thousands, hundreds of thousands of wells that are not, they're inactive, they're orphaned, even millions. Some would even say there may be a million of these around the state of Texas. But what happens when you find these old plugs and then that pollution ends up going through them into an aquifer or into up to the surface? And so today, basically we're not protective of groundwater. We're seeing this through the geysers and the leaking wells that we see across the state. And recently, the Railroad Commission this last year attempted to address this by creating some new guidelines. Just in the northern Delaware Basin, in the Permian Basin, which is around the Pecos area, where they've been seeing a lot of strong earthquakes. But these guidelines, they're not even these aren't sufficient to protect groundwater. They increase their area review to try to look for where there might be problems that the injection pressures might cause these wells to leak, and that area of review isn't sufficient. We've seen this groundwater or the produced water spew out of the ground in a geyser 12 miles away, 3 miles away. And the area of review, the maximum they have them looking at is 2 miles right now. And so we're calling for a rulemaking to actually start using science to determine what the risk is. And if you're going to inject in underground and you're pressurizing it, we need stronger protections. So we're not seeing all the things happening around the state that we're seeing. Yeah.
Julie. I think that's a really important point that you're making, is that, okay, we can understand this problem as much as we can, but what are we doing about it? And this is something that the Railroad Commission, our state oil and gas agency, has the authority and responsibility to do, is update their rulemakings or their guidance so that they are maybe taking into consideration these problems that are emerging, that we're starting to see with injection wells failing. So I think that's a good takeaway, is that there are some solutions here. There is ways that they could be more discerning when it comes to applicants and the permits that they grant them. We are pretty much at time. I want to thank everybody for coming and adding your perspective into this topic and lending your expertise. I think this is a really big topic, and we may need to do a second panel to really hear more about it. But this was really eye-opening. I'm going to drop your all's organizations in the comments of this so that folks can check you all out. And as always, Commission Shift follows these open meetings and reports back. We do debriefs and live tweets every month. So the next open meeting of the Railroad Commission is March 25th. So we'll see you then. And in the meantime, we encourage everyone to follow us on social media, check out our website at commissionshift.org. You can sign up for our newsletter updates, where we can go more in depth about topics like this that appear in the agendas at the open meeting. So thank you again, each of you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.